Good morning, everyone. Welcome to UUCC, the UU Church of Canandaigua. I'm Eileen, I'm your minister. I'm so glad to be with you this morning. Before we get started today, I have just a few quick announcements to share with you. So if you'll allow me to share my screen, I can show those announcements to you now. Let's see. First is that we need some singers for a virtual choir. So our neighbors at First Unitarian in Rochester are organizing a virtual choir to do a recording of the piece of the Hallelujah Chorus for around Easter time. And they have invited nearby congregants in other congregations to join in that chorus. So we need members for the choir. Our church is planning to participate. It would include recording yourself, singing your part, and then sending that recording in to be compiled with the many other singers. And I've simplified it quite a bit, but our music director, Bill Mills, is coordinating our singers for this choir, and you can learn more about it if you're interested by contacting Bill. You can see his email address is on the screen, and I will put in the chat his email address as well as his phone number. So you can contact Bill if you're interested in being part of a virtual choir, or if you think you might be interested, but you want to ask some questions like, how the heck does a virtual choir even work? Bill Mills will be your guy. And then we are planning a service in May about elder wisdom. So if you consider yourself to be an elder, whatever your actual age is, then we would love to have a service that lifts up some of the wisdom that you have been blessed with over your years. So if you think you might have 2 to 3 minutes of wisdom to share that comes out of being an elder, then please contact me and we will find a way for you to participate in that service. I would love to hear from you. And this is the end of our announcements this morning. The final piece I want to share is that there is a board meeting after our service this morning. If you are interested in attending that board meeting, you can email Laura Wink, our board president, for a link. And let us now take a deep breath in and enter a space of worship. It's time to light our chalice. If you have a chalice nearby or any old candle, let's light them together. And as we light them, we'll say our chalice lighting words. We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together. I want to tell you a story this morning that comes from my mom. My mom tells this story often about her older brother on the morning of his first sacrament of reconciliation. So they were raised Catholic in their family, and they participated in confession or reconciliation, as it's also called, as a sacrament of the church. In essence, the parishioner confesses to their various misdeeds and mistakes to a priest, prays, asks forgiveness, and the priest, as a stand-in for God, absolves them of their sins. He might then assign some act of penance to make right what had been done wrong, or unfortunately, sometimes to serve as a punishment. Besides listing the sins, it's a pretty scripted conversation. So if you've never heard it, it begins like this. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. It has been X amount of time since my last confession, and goes on from there. So my mom cheerfully recalls listening in on her older brother's first reconciliation. Apparently, he sat down and recited the beginning of the script, Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. Then, when it came time to account for his sins, this 7-year-old simply said, I have never sinned. The priest was taken aback and stammered a bit. And her brother said, Oh, I thought hard about everything I've ever done, and I decided it was all correct. I never sinned. Thank you. And then got up and skipped out the door. And now, we here in our church might not practice the sacrament of reconciliation, and our views on sin and salvation are wildly different from the Catholic Church's. I'm confident there's no risk of me becoming any of y'all's stand-in for God. And I do think, though, we learned something from this version of non-reconciliation, which is that we all can relate to that 7-year-old boy. We all have some tendencies to pretend all is well, even when it isn't. Sometimes we would rather just pretend all our choices were perfectly warranted and acceptable, however absurd it seems. But I hope we are a church where the genuine power of reconciliation is invited in, where we trust each other enough to say, that hurt me, or I think I messed up, and open the door to be changed by forgiveness. Let us begin this morning in song. I invite you to sing with us our opening hymn, Break Not the Circle. And now it is time for a story. This morning's is a story about forgiveness, and it comes to us from the Christian Bible. You may have heard this story. It is the parable of the prodigal son. And the story goes like this. It's a story that Jesus told in a book that's written by someone we call Luke. So Jesus tells the story this way. There once was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger son said to his father, Father, please give me my share of our property. And so the father, being kind to his sons, divided his property between them and gave each son his share. Not long after that, the younger son took all that he'd gotten and set off for a distant land where he lived wild, and he spent all that money and he squandered his wealth. After he had spent everything and was left with nothing, he began to feel a dire need. He had nothing to live on, nothing to eat, nowhere to live. And so he hired himself out as a servant to live in the fields and feed the pigs. And yet he himself wasn't even given food to eat. And he started to feel jealous of those pigs. And that's when he came to his senses. He said, "Man, I've screwed up," or something like that. "My own father's servants have food to spare, and I'm here feeling jealous of these pigs as I starve to death. It's time that I confess what I've done wrong. I will go back to my father and say to him, I've made a mistake. I would like to be hired as one of your servants." So he got up and he went out to travel to his father's house. And as he came up the road to his father's house, his father looked out and saw him coming. And his father told the household, "Prepare a feast. My son is returning." He put on his best outfit and laid a feast on the table. He ran out to meet his son. And he said, "Come in. You're safe and sound, and there's a feast for you waiting." Now, the older brother, who had been at work, came in to see that the younger brother had come home with nothing and was being celebrated. And he felt a little jealous. And he said, "I have never disobeyed you. I did everything right, but you haven't feasted for me." And the father said, "My son, you were always with me and you were always safe. But now we have a reason to celebrate because we thought your brother was lost and dead, but he is alive and found." And this is what has transformed our household. And there is the end of our story. And now, my friends, it's time to share the deepest feelings of our hearts with one another. We are a community that holds one another in all our joys and our sorrows. Whatever we are going through, whatever feelings arise in us, we know that we are with one another in that. And as we begin this morning to share whatever joys and sorrows lie within us, I want to invite you that if you have joys and sorrows that don't feel right to share here, or even if they do, that these are the names of our pastoral care team if you need to reach out to someone for more conversation about what's going on with you. Our pastoral care team includes Pat Mills, Kevin House, Nancy Reed, Scobie Beers, and of course myself. You can reach out to any of us at any time if you need to talk more about whatever it is that's on your heart. And so now I invite you to use the chat here in Zoom to share with us this morning, what is it that is on your heart today? Are there joys or sorrows to lift up? We sit with all these big feelings today. We're grateful about our COVID-free loved ones and concerned for our elderly parents who we have to keep our distance from. We have such a mix of feelings about grandchildren's birthdays, joy for their lives and sorrow for being apart from them. Joy about a real hockey game. Gratitude for Kevin and his care of our building. Joy around a big family chapel service this morning. We have healing prayers for Jimmy, for Donna, and for Joe. And we are grateful for Nancy's ministry. For these and all the feelings, all the joys and sorrows left in the silence of our own hearts, know that we are with you. And I would like to invite you now into the spiritual practice of generosity. Each month, we share a quarter of our plate offering with a community service partner. an organization in our community that shares our values. And this month's offering will be shared with the Rochester Association of Black Journalists. So you can give this morning online by visiting our website, canandaiguauu.org/connection/donate, or by mailing a check to the church at 3024 Cooley Road in Canandaigua, or by setting up an automatic recurring gift with your bank. And in any of those cases, if you make a note with the offering gift that it's meant for this morning's plate collection, then we'll be sure to share a quarter of it with that service partner. We thank you for your generosity this morning. And let us now enter into a time of centering and meditation, followed by shared silence. So let's take a deep breath in, let it out with a sigh. Get comfortable where you sit. Maybe some part of you finds the floor or a table or touches the arm of a chair to help you feel grounded on this good earth. Our meditation words this morning are by Robert Eller Isaacs, and there is a response which you can speak in the silence of your own mind or speak aloud where you are. I will share the response on our screen. It is called a litany of atonement. For remaining silent when a single voice would have made a difference, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For each time that our fears have made us rigid and inaccessible, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For each time we have struck out in anger without just cause, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For each time that greed has blinded us to the needs of others, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For the selfishness which sets us apart and alone, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For falling short of any admonitions of the Spirit, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For losing sight of our unity, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For those and so many acts, both evident and subtle, which have fueled the illusion of our separateness, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. Amen.
Thank you. of justice, roots hold me close, wings set me free, spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
So I promised you during my last sermon on a good apology that forgiveness would come next. And it feels right that now, entering the month where we explore what it means to be a people who bring head and heart in harmony, that we should talk about reconciliation. Reconciling means literally bringing together, or more accurately, bringing back together what has been separated. Reconciliation as a spiritual practice is the act of putting our whole selves together again. If we think about conflict as being separated from the whole of ourselves, separated from our conscience, from our moral center, from another person who we've harmed or who has harmed us, separated sometimes from our communities, from our sense of oneness with the whole of life, then avoiding conflict can seem like the best choice whenever it's possible. Smoothing conflict over can seem like the best thing to do. We might be universalists at heart, believing that all that is broken can be mended, but like, why break it, right? It's certainly easier to avoid the hard conversations and uncomfortable feelings that arise when we meet conflict head on. I know it's tempting for me, but I also think it's a trap. I think we could do ourselves and our communities a favor if we reconciled ourselves with conflict. If we'd stopped thinking of conflict as bad, unfortunate, damaging, it can be those things. It can do harm, but avoiding it at all costs can as well. When we're brave enough to step into conflict where it arises, we get to experience the transformative power of forgiveness, of reconciliation. We have all sorts of silly and dangerous ways of getting away from conflict or pretending it doesn't exist. We use triangulation, for example, talking to one person about our conflict with another person, making a little triangle. Sometimes it's a quadrangle or even a hexagon. I will admit to you, I was once a master of triangulation. As a middle school girl, my friends were often in conflict with one another. If you've been or known middle school girls, maybe you can imagine it. I would hear from Katie about how Jessica was angry with Heather. All these names are timely, but they are fake. And I gently talk with Heather about her alleged offenses to Jessica's psyche. Having heard her side, I talk with Sarah about how misunderstood poor Heather was, and Sarah would tell Jessica, it felt diplomatic. I thought I was a real peacemaker. I wasn't. I was manipulative. I spent untold energy quieting conflicts that, had they been allowed to be loud, might have been resolvable with true growth and forgiveness. And it seems fairly harmless in the end. We were middle schoolers. They were fights about like the right pink pencil case. None of these conflicts seem to matter in retrospect. No real damage done. But I was learning. We were learning a communication style that is so damaging. It took half a life to unlearn. And we were part of a cultural reinforcement of white supremacy that does enormous harm. We had no idea at the time, and probably for many years after. White women are brought up to be peacekeepers, but not peacemakers. We're not the only people who triangulate by far, and it's almost always a harmful tactic, no matter who does it. But we are taught from an early age how to smooth over conflict, cool hot heads, keep everyone's tones and tempers steady. We are often, in the culture of white supremacy, the keepers of what passes for peace. That role establishes what looks like peace, but is not, because it ignores justice, because it stifles the direct redress of harm in relationship. And even in fights about pink pencil cases, this is what we were learning. And so now we start to see why conflict avoidance can be so very concerning. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. put it this way, saying, "I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate who prefers a negative peace, the absence of tension, to a positive peace, the presence of justice." When we're too afraid to embrace conflict in a way that might lead to reconciliation, we establish a negative peace. It may be quiet, it may be orderly, but unlike reconciliation, it does not make whole again what has been, quietly or not, torn apart. Another way that we tend to avoid conflict is through what's often called stonewalling, a stubborn refusal to engage, ignoring direct communication about anything uncomfortable or difficult. It can look like the silent treatment or the cold shoulder. When I was the membership director of a large UU church, I was the person who would contact members who fell away from participation in church life. They seemed to have stopped attending services, stopped pledging, stopped participating in their groups. So I would check on them before we removed them from a membership list. Usually, there was some mundane reason, like they moved or changed religions, or just didn't feel like coming to church that year. But often, too often, I would give someone a call 12 or 18 months after their last contact with the congregation and hear about how they were upset or offended about a congregational decision or a sermon or a new policy. And we had never known because they hadn't engaged directly to address the conflict. They'd just done the church equivalent of silently storming out of the room. It pained me to have those conversations, how much they'd missed out on by building that wall instead of engaging in conflict, how much we'd missed out on as a community by not having a chance to have those hard conversations and those big feelings. While we might be, as a culture, teaching white women to police everyone's feelings, we teach men not to have any. If you aren't supposed to say, "I feel sad about this," or even think it, then what else is there but to storm out of the room? And how much harm does that do? How much is missed for everyone by the appearance of peace we get from the absence of someone who is hurting? It is not a positive peace. We also have this tendency as humans in conflict to make nice, to keep sweet, as our evangelical siblings like to call it. The ultimate denial, just to pretend everything is fine while we quietly seethe. And I probably don't need to tell you that this practice, which looks peaceful from the outside, feels nothing like peace within. A friend once told me this story about her parents, neither of whom liked asparagus. They hated it, in fact. But her mother made it once for a family dinner, and her father, feeling it more important to make nice than to make conflict, praised the dish. So even though she didn't like it, the mother made it again, and the father praised it again. He'd pick up asparagus at the store with dread, thinking his wife liked it so much, and she'd cook it with disgust, thinking she was squashing her own feelings for the sake of her husband's. They went 40 years eating a vegetable they both hated just to keep the supposed peace before either of them confessed the truth. That's the thing about our conflict avoidance habits. They aren't keeping the peace. They don't usually maintain any real peace for us at all. They certainly don't put our hearts and our minds at peace. It turns out that peacekeeping isn't the same as peacemaking. Peacemaking sometimes doesn't feel very peaceful inside of us at all. So many of these choices come when we think of peace as calm or as quiet. And we all know how a quiet body can house a multitude of pains. A calm house can be thick with tension. A friendly church can be ridden with discord. And these habits are at work in nefarious ways in our society. We stonewall people of color who are saying our lives matter, and it's not creating any kind of peace. We decenter voices of people who are already marginalized when we cut them out of public conflict conversations. We make peacekeeping, not peacemaking, claims about being a post-racial society or needing to listen to both sides of an argument against extreme injustice. Because if we pretend a conflict doesn't exist, things look peaceful, but it isn't a positive peace. If we think back to a time when segregation was the law of the land in much of our country, but protests against segregation were not yet common, things maybe had the appearance of peace, certainly of order. But it was, as Dr. King says, a negative peace, lacking in justice. And maintaining that negative peace cut us off, literally, cut us off from one another, cut us off from the possibility of being reconciled. Preferencing the reduction of tension over the establishment of justice takes reconciliation off the table, not just in our partnerships or friendships or homes or churches, but for our country, for humanity. So, how to undo the avoidance habits and bring forgiveness to the table? First, I think we bring our heads and hearts together. We need to feel our real feelings, to sit with even the feelings that cause us discomfort. We can stay connected with our whole selves in a conflict by scanning our bodies to check in with all the feelings they're holding, by noticing what our senses are telling us. This chair is supportive, the lights are bright, I'm a bit hungry, so on. And then we can take the brave step, the trusting step of communicating our feelings and our needs honestly to those we're in relationship with. We can invite their own feelings and needs into the conversation and hear them with curiosity in place of judgment. Almost never have I regretted ignoring the instinct to avoid conflict and choosing loving directness instead. I'm having a hard time with something, and I wonder if we can talk about it. Though it's hard as hell to say, contains the possibility of the freedom of forgiveness. And avoidance contains only more of the same. Next, we can search ourselves with a gentle honesty about mistakes we may have made, choices that had consequences we didn't intend, and we can offer and receive good apologies. Apologies that include no excuses and no defense, but a simple, I was wrong, and an, I'm sorry I hurt you, and maybe a dose of, I'll work on making this right again, and really nothing else. Doing the inner work of reestablishing right relationship with ourselves might bring us back into right relationship with one another. When we meet conflict bravely and directly, it becomes a blessing to us. We can give and receive apologies with open hearts and perhaps experience the spiritual transformation of being reconciled to one another and to the whole of our own self. May it be so. Amen.
How I've been thinking lately about the people I meet. Car wash on the corner and the hole in the street. The way my ankles hurt with shoes on my feet. And I'm wondering if I'm gonna see tomorrow. Father, forgive us for what we must do. You forgive us and we'll forgive you. We'll forgive each other till we both turn blue. Then we'll whistle and go fishing in heaven. I was in the army but I never dug a trench. I used to bust my knuckles on a monkey wrench. I go to town and look at all the girls on the bench, but I don't think they ever even noticed me. Father, forgive us for what we must do. You forgive us and we'll forgive you. We'll forgive each other till we both turn blue. Then we'll whistle and go fishing in heaven. Fish and a whistle, we'll whistle and fish. Eat everything that they put on your dish. And when we get through, we'll make a big wish that we never have to do this again. Again, again. On my very first job I said thank you and please. They made me scrub a parking lot down on my knees. Then I got fired for being scared of bees, but they only give me 50 cents an hour. Father, forgive us for what we must do. You forgive us and we'll forgive you. We'll forgive each other till we both turn blue. Then we'll whistle and go fishing in heaven. Fish and a whistle, whistle and fish. Eat everything that they put on your dish. When we get through, we'll make a big wish that we never have to do this again. Again, again. Father, forgive us for what we must do. You forgive us and we'll forgive you. We'll forgive each other till we both turn blue. Then we'll whistle and go fishing in heaven. Then we'll whistle and go fishing in heaven. Then we'll whistle and go fishing in heaven.
Thank you, Bill, and many thanks to John Prine, one of too many lives lost this year to COVID-19. Let's close with these words again from Robert Eller Isaacs. First, we forgive ourselves. Next, and one another. And finally, we begin again in love. I invite you to sing together our closing hymn, Words That We Hold Tight.
Words that we hold tight won't let us go. Paths we don't follow will haunt us so. What will undo us is not our friend. Show us, O Spirit, how to befriend. Show us how to forgive to all who live. Show us forgiveness that we may live. To speak of loving is not to love. Lies move among us, below, above. When we are raging, needing to mend, show us, O Spirit, how to befriend. Show us how to forgive to all who live. Show us forgiveness that we may live. love is doubtful, choice is not clear. We turn to worship to cast out fear. Teach us forgiveness, make love our end. Show us, O Spirit, how to befriend. Show us how to forgive to all who live. Show us forgiveness that we may live.
Let us extinguish our chalices together. And as we do so, we say these words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you so much for gathering together this morning.